in 1969, and the fifth one took place with internet and the digitalization. And today we are facing the sixth industrial revolution, that's AI. And to me, if I take a step back, I think we only had two industrial revolutions. The steam machine that help people, I would say, to magnify their physical strengths, and today it's about the cognitive capacities that we have. And what is the most amazing thing, and most people don't realize that, is that AI used to be a deductive process. So AI would repeat what AI would have learned. Today, we are in a pure inductive model. That means that you start with a reality, with fragments of information, you create something that has been, and again, it's destroyed, re-put into pieces, and over and over. So the AI capacities are totally infinite. And that is what is puzzling, because if we feel that we are being protected by our, I would say, artistic capacities, by our intuition, things that we would call soft skills, we would be, of course, totally overrun by AI. So it's a new revolution, and when some studies show that 60% of the jobs will be affected by AI, it will be 100%, of course, eventually. Maybe not immediately, but it will take place. And this raises many, many, many issues. The first one, and I will expand on that, it will transform the labor market, because multiple people will lose their job, there will be new jobs being created, but more important, if we are supplemented by a machine, it means, and it's critical, that the value of one unit of human work will decrease compared to 1 unit of work being processed by a machine. And it will raise multiple consequences regarding taxation and social security. The pricing of goods and services will also be affected, because the cost of what we produce, of course, will be changed. Today, the cost is mostly based on an accounting system that is itself based on a pure industrial model. It will change towards something different, where the value will come from intangible assets or value provided by a machine that will be independent from human work. That means that the pricing of things may change and will change. That means also that the law of supply and demand will be affected. Things that appear to be expensive today may become cheap, and the other way around. So for example, if you need a haircut, because you need probably somebody to cut your hair, it may, on a relative basis, become way more expensive than to become a university professor. Because obviously all the knowledge is there and available to you. It will also change the shape of companies, and that's interesting. Because I would say all economists agree on one thing. That is the idea that the ideal model to create innovation, to stimulate competition, to stimulate growth, is a pure competition market with multiple actors that can come in or leave the market all the time, with the idea that the marginal cost will be equal to the marginal income, and the idea that if you create or if you have de facto or de jure monopolies or oligopolies, it will affect pure competition. The US has been created on the fight against monopolies. When the US made its first revolution against the Brits, it was because they were being imposed a monopoly with the tea, the import of tea. And you have in the US a law that has been passed in the 19th century prohibiting monopolies. Today we are in a situation where, with AI and with the digital revolution, we have multiple monopolies. It means that the model we are in is void today, and that there will be two kinds of companies, the one being able to strengthen their own monopolies because they have the capacities to buy all their competitors, and small ones that of course will have to support all the rules and the norms being imposed by the large companies on governments. So if I take one step back, you can see a landscape where you would have huge companies that would be above governments, that will be who will be able to impose their own norms and rules to governments. And since the norm will be, of course, applicable to the small ones will be unable to cope with the norms that are being imposed to them. So that's a total shift compared to the economic landscape we had some 20 or 30 years ago. It will also affect, probably, the cost of capital. Today, the cost of capital is based on an interest rate plus, for the one who have studied finance, a risk premium. What is a risk premium? It is the premium you take, you pay, or you receive, because you take on a risk. And what kind of risk are we talking about? We are talking the risk of uncertainty of the future. So for the one of you having studied finance, when you discount cash flows, and that's the way financial market works, and I've been myself the CEO of the stock market, so I could spend hours on that, you discount future cash flows using an interest rate that's the pure cost of money, plus a risk premium because you discount things that you do not know if they will happen. But if you factor in AI into that equation, you will be able to decrease the level of uncertainty that is factored into the equation. That means that the cost of capital could be decreased thanks to AI, as if you could modelize the future better than what you can do today. That's a huge shift. So, for example, markets will become more efficient, they will know more, with less uncertainty and probably a decreased cost of capital. That will be good for all companies, that will be less good for savers, but very good for borrowers. Now, let's talk about the key of my speech. I told you that the labor market would be totally reshuffled because of AI. And the seminal debate is the sharing of the productivity gains. What are the productivity gains? That's the ability to produce more with the same input or to produce the same with less input. I would say that the global level of productivity gains is equal to the growth rate of the economy, 2 to 3% a year, depending, of course, on industries. The first economist who tried to study that was a guy called Karl Marx. Karl Marx was born in 1818. He passed away in 1883. So the guy emerged because of the first industrial revolution. The guy could observe the shift of the economy. He could observe the multiple revolutions that took place because of this industrial revolution, and two of them took place, one in 1830, one in 1848. And his claim was to say, workers are not properly compensated for the labor they give to the so-called capitalists. So, put another way, it's as if the capitalists would take a slice of the labor unpaid, and the claim of Marx was to say the sum of the so-called slices of work that Marx would call capital gains would become capital. So his idea was to say capital is not created ex nihilo, capital is created because a piece of work is not remunerated to the worker, is not paid to the worker. And so the imbalance of the sharing of productivity gains create the existence of capital. So ultimately, his idea was to say capital should disappear because workers should be paid what they deserve, and there would be no room for capital. Of course, we all realize that if we end up with this conclusion, nothing happens anymore, because you need, at some point in time, people making investments in capital in order to put people at work. But he was also claiming that capital was a quantum, that's a Latin word meaning a part, a quantum of labor, that capital would always come from labor. So even if you find a gold mine in your garden, you have to work this out to melt the gold, to make bullions, whatever. You need some human work to create value. That's very interesting because nobody knows how to share productivity gains. How is it possible to know exactly what is the proper remuneration of labor and the proper remuneration of capital? We can take things by the side of capital because financial markets tell you with some, I would say, some number crunching, what would be the remuneration of a risky capital depending on the risk you take in a specific project. And assuming you are diversified in all the ventures that you are entertaining. So if you start with the capital markets, you say capital deserve, I make it up, a yield of 11%, you take this 11% and the rest will be for workers. But does it mean that the worker remuneration is correct compared to capital? No. Because capital can be diversified away, labor is never diversified. I cannot diversify myself, I cannot multiply myself, I cannot invest myself in multiple ventures. And that, of course, means that I'm always weaker than capital. By the way, when Marx made a statement that all workers should join on a worldwide basis, he came to this conclusion because he realized that the velocity of capital, the mobility of capital, was greater than the mobility of labor. Of course, we cannot go as fast as capital. And so he was saying, even if we are able to compute the real value of labor, labor will be always affected by its lack of mobility. So very, very complex equation without any solution. We still don't know how to compute that. If Marx would have lived today, that would have been even harder to make the computation because in the past, in the 19th century, the only way things were being measured would be to compute the sum of the costs, like an accounting system, an historical cost accounting system would do. You see, if you take a P&L, profit and loss account, you see all the costs that have been incurred to produce something, you know the sale price, and then you can know if you are making a profit or loss. But today, because of financial markets, what happens? The value of companies is not anymore computed by accounting. The value of companies is being computed by financial markets. What do financial markets do? They discount, as I was mentioning, future cash flows using a risk premium. Of course, the future cash flows are somehow, and we do not know the chemistry, influenced by the past, but basically there is no way to reconcile the past, and accounting is based on the past, and the future. So if you take a company like Amazon, Google, all these companies, Meta, all these companies, they are all based on the expectation that one day there will be a cash flow. Would it be a dividend, maybe a capital gain, who knows? But if you take this measure, you realize that it's even harder to know where are what is the sharing of productivity gains. Because if you take the market value of a company, you do not know what will be the proper remuneration of capital and how many people will be employed in the future and what will be their remuneration. You can suspect that labor will be underpaid. When you read that Amazon has or is about to order 750,000 robots, it means that labor, of course, will be disqualified to the benefit of capital. But if you take the market value, you don't know what you discount. You expect future cash flows. So if Marx would be there, and if you would ask Marx, how is it possible to share the value of Amazon into what will be deserved by workers and capital, there's no way to know. So the equation is even more complex. We can have the intuition that because the GAFAM have such a huge market value compared to the global GDP, probably there will be a shift of wealth from workers to capital. And that the productivity gains will be captured by capital rather than being paid out to workers. That's pure intuition because I have no way to prove my case. But intuitively, when you see a market value increasing so much in a world where the idea is to have a machine that can replace or help or increase the productivity of a worker, you can have this intuition that the shift is taking place. So if we would translate the situation as of today in the past, probably that the capital gain would be lower in the past than they are today. So very complex equation, very complex equation. But then, let's go farther than that. If we follow this intuition that wealth will be captured by capitalists rather than workers, how do you ensure a proper taxation and proper social security contributions? Because the system we are in today is still based on a pure industrial model. We still pay taxes mostly on our labor, income coming from labor, and social contributions, social security in this country, are also based on labor income. Very important. But that means that if we are in a world tomorrow where the shift is accomplished, that the wealth move from labor because labor is underpaid, or because the remuneration of any unit of work is lower on a relative basis than today, obviously we have a big issue, because this shift will create a huge issue regarding social protection. The social protection will not be able to be financed by labor contribution because their remuneration on a relative basis will be lower than it is today. So that means that we would be living in a world where, to ensure some equality, the taxation should move from labor to capital, of course, to the people capturing the productivity gains. So we are exactly back to the Karl Marx theory, who made the statement that companies should pay more to the government or more to workers. We are talking the same thing, because if this intuition again is correct, and if it's possible to tax companies capturing productivity gains, it means that the money being captured from companies will be used to ensure the social protection of the workers who are themselves underpaid because their own productivity gains are captured by the machine. So it's a complete shift, complete new perspective. Because today, when you make the assessment that one day capital should pay social contribution, of course, people are astonished. They say capital has no social contribution to pay. Well, the answer is yes. Because again, if you take the Marxist theory, and I was saying, capital is a quantum of labor. Capital comes from labor, which means that capital cannot be seen independently from labor, that will be probably even underpaid in the future. So the equation is probably correct when you take a look at that. But so it will be a complete shift. And already today, we all feel that we are better off being a shareholder of Microsoft, NVIDIA, than to work as an employee for a bank. Because we know that working for a company with a work that can be duplicated by a machine will, of course, lead to this disappearance of these jobs. So the social equation is extremely powerful. There's one guy who made a theory out of that. He was born, I think, at the end of the 18th century. He passed away in the 19th century. His name was Sismondi. He was an Italian guy. I think he was kind of an economist. And the guy said, the guy observed the Industrial Revolution before Marx. And he said, every time a human being is being replaced by a machine, the capitalist should pay to the worker a universal income, a compensation that will, of course, compensate the remuneration of the work that has disappeared. Of course, that's an extreme perspective, because if you do that, maybe the capitalist will say, I'm not going to innovate because I have to innovate into the machine, plus pay a remuneration to the guy being replaced by the machine. Or I will entertain my venture in some other place where this kind of taxation does not exist. But remember that the Sismondi tax will come back one day, because it means, globally speaking, the shift of taxation from labor to capital. And of course, the debate today is not ready. We do not talk about these things, but we feel in the situation we're in today that it's starting to happen, even in this country, in Belgium. And by the way, if you take the share of capital income and labor income on a worldwide basis, you see that since 40 years ago, the share of worldwide income going to capital is increasing to the detriment of the share of income going to labor. So the shift is already taking place, and to me it will accelerate once we will implement AI. And we are still at the start of AI, at the start of AI. So, that's my, I would say, theoretical perspective. And the risk is, of course, if we don't do that, to have increasing inequalities in the society. Today we have already exponential inequalities. Take Belgium. There are three criteria to qualify poverty. There are 22% of the Belgian citizens meeting at least one criteria. And when there is a wave of inflation, the percentage to me, like we had 2 years ago, can go up to 30%. So we see already that without the social state we are in today, we would have 20, 30%, I don't know, people living below the poverty line. But if the social state, and again we are back to the previous point, cannot be fueled by proper social contribution coming from labor and capital, of course inequalities will increase. So that's why some people say, and I'm one of them, say that AI will not destroy the society, not at all, but may, I would destroy on physical grounds, but may destroy the level, I would say, of solidarity within a society. And the risk being that, as it is happening in the States, you see I would say the line between the ultra-rich people and the poor people, being bolder and bolder every day. So that's a real danger. And this will have, of course, to be added to the disappearance of jobs, which raises another issue: how to train people. How to train people. What will be the value of the human labor, as I was saying? That's very important, because the way we have learned to learn is a pure deductive approach. So since we were young, since we went at school, we were taught how to apply rules that we would sometimes have learned by heart. In an AI environment, knowledge is inductive. So the knowledge doesn't come from what we have learned. The knowledge comes from the analysis of a situation that changes all the time, exactly like a stock market price that forgets what it has been 1 second before. That means that the way we have learned to learn is totally void in this AI environment, totally void. And so we will have to retrain people to help them to cope with the machine, or even to live with the machine. And then again, we can see a huge difference between the US and Europe. In the US, AI has been invented. The US is based on induction. They do not apply principles. They look at the reality, they create rules, and on the next day, the rules have changed because the situation has changed. We Europeans are totally deductive. We apply the rules, and we are hurt by the way Americans are thinking, because it hurts the way we have learned to learn. Well, it means that not only some jobs will disappear, but for the remaining jobs, the jobs will be able to cope with the machine, the way of thinking will have to change. That raises huge issues regarding education. And I'm not talking, universities. I'm talking pupils, starting school when they are 6 or even before that. Because the way people will have to be taught will have to be based on induction, on the analysis of a situation that changes all the time. Are we ready to do that today? No, we don't have the professors to do that. We don't have the people sufficiently open to be in this new world. And you can even go farther than that and ask yourself, what will be the purpose of schools and universities in that new setting? Because if today a student can have access to all the knowledge that is, of course, is way wider than what a professor can teach, why do you need a professor? Yes, maybe to share some human values, to share our values of humanity, or all these things, but basically the role of a professor today is not to share soft skills, it is to share knowledge. So not only we have to change the way we think, but we have to rethink the educational system. That's a huge task, and education comes before the job market. So total revolution. And by the way, I do suspect that the people today who decide not to train themselves to AI or to the way AI can help them will lose their job at some point in time, because we are facing this revolution, and it's as if we would keep on lightening ourselves with candles when we have, the light that we have today. So big thing. And so eventually, the question, when I connect all these dots, is to know what will be social welfare in the future. Social welfare being based on education, remuneration of labor, sharing of productivity gains. That's the real debate. Will we be able to live in peace without social tensions, social violence in a world that is facing a revolution? And guess what? Every time an industrial revolution took place, there's been social violence. Every time. Because especially because this revolution comes fast. The previous one, it took decades before they were rolled out into the community. Today they are faster than ever. So if I would be a politician today, my long-term goal would be to ask myself, what can I do today to ensure, if I put myself 10 years down the road, that social appeasement, peace without social tension, social welfare will be ensured in a world that will have gone through an industrial revolution that is probably the faster and the deeper that we have had since 2 centuries ago. That's a question. I do not have an answer, but I think that raising the question is the first step to find an answer, because definitely it is beyond the level of, I would say, issues we are talking today in the political world. This is what I wanted to share with you. I have only questions, no answer, but again, I think that asking ourselves these things is very important and is up to what we need to expect from ourselves. Thank you. How does it work?
I'll read the question to you, but
Okay, just see them. Okay.
Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to put it on the pad, and then I'll read out to him.
Maybe I have a question.
All right, feel free to write your questions on the pad, guys. Okay, so first question: has the speed of innovation slowed, or is innovation getting harder?
Well, that's a very touchy topic. If you look up economic textbooks, you will see that it seems that the productivity gains are slowing. And that's totally counterintuitive, because we know that we innovate more than ever. So how to reconcile that? I suspect that we underestimate the transformation that all the tools we have today will bring in the future. So if you take people of my generation, we used to speak one language, sometimes two. We used to follow a long-haul university cursus. today, the level of maturity of people, the level of innovation, the speed of moving things is, of course, faster than before. So I suspect that we have a tanker of productivity gains that will one day emerge, but not with the traditional measures we are implementing. So I think that the level of innovation is, of course, increasing.
All right. So second one, what do you think companies can do to contribute positively to the change and protect their workers rather than take advantage of the cost reduction?
There will be a trade-off being made by every company. I think the companies are there to maximize profits, definitely. And so if a company can lay off somebody because the guy is being replaced by a machine, the company will do that. So I suspect that the only way to address that would be to say, would be between asking the company to pay social security and or a kind of the six-monthly tax being used to indemnify the people being fired. But if you take if you look at a company as capital being created out of labor, and if you see labor being replaced by a machine, you always end up asking a company to pay social contribution and potentially additional taxes. So that's the way to protect workers on a macroeconomic basis. But on a microeconomic basis, it will be more difficult.
All right, so the next one. Is it possible that someday there will be no work for people?
No work,
No work for people because of the AI.
Well, if it happens, then we all have a problem, because if workers disappear, there will be nobody to buy the products that are being produced by companies. So ultimately, if we are being all replaced by robots, we'll have no money to produce what the robots will produce. So the balance will be found. You know, every time there is an Israeli revolution, there is a fear that work will totally disappear. It's not the case, but all Israeli revolution create a social transformation.
Okay, so the next one is, do you have any opinion on the theory of techno-feudalism and the concept of capital cloud owned by the GAFAM and fueled by AI?
Well, what you see today is that the concentration of wealth among a limited number of companies is really an issue, the size of these companies should not have reached what it has reached. Because if we would have respected the fight against monopolies and oligopolies, these companies would have been bifurcated since long ago. So that's a big issue. But more important than that, there is another issue. We do not know what is the model being featured by the Silicon Valley guys. We do not know. Sometimes they speak about humanity 2.0. Where is democracy behind that? I don't know. So that's what scares me. I would say that the model they are rolling out, to me, is more frightening than the size of the companies.
Okay, so the next one would be, talking about AI, which branches of work do you think will be hit first and the hardest by AI?
Well, the first will be hit will be the people who have a repetitive work. But I would say everybody who can bring an intellectual content will be hit. You know, if I take my case, I've published 92 books, and I would say 600,000-700,000 articles. Always open source. I never took any copyright. When I ask ChatGPT, which is a basic form of AI, to write an article on any economic topic using my own writing style, I recognize myself in the text it didn't produce. Which means that all of you can write an article according to my style. If my style pleases you, that's another story. And it means also that a young guy for your age can do the same as me, and I'm 63. So basically, I will be hit. And even intuition, even poetry, even dreaming, that one day you transform into words, or painting, can be replaced by a machine. To me, I'm a big lover of the Beatles. When I heard the song Here and Now that has been recreated some months ago with the voice of John Lennon, honestly, I thought it was the Beatles. It were not the Beatles. Remember, Rubens has been painted 4 years ago by an AI. It means that the IP of creativity has disappeared.
Okay, so the next one would be okay. So this one, to balance work and capital return, isn't it a systematic shift of workers' retribution from salary to stock, or a better balance between the two, an appropriate way to compensate for work?
That's a very, very, very intelligent question, because Marx never thought that workers should be paid by stocks. His idea was capital would implode and that there would be a revolution putting an end even to the concept of money. By the way, you may not know that, but when Lenin made this revolution in 1917 in what was called Russia at the time, some thinkers thought that money should disappear and that the concept of capital by itself could not exist. But I would say that it's a good idea to give stock options to people because every worker would be a would-be capitalist. But again, it does not solve the issue of social contributions. It's a way to share the productivity gains, but it doesn't solve the issue of who will pay the social contribution, knowing that when I pay today social contribution, I do not pay for myself. I pay for the people who are on the dole, unemployed, or retired. So that question remains open.
Okay, so the next one would be, do you think forcing transparency of the financial and business world is necessary to properly tax capital? What other measures could be needed?
To me, the solution, if you take this country for the Belgian citizens, we have two systems in Belgium. We have taxation that is based on income, and we have social contributions paid by the worker or companies coming from companies and workers. The only way to solve the social contribution and taxation issue will be to merge taxation and social security. That all the social contribution, that somebody would be taxed based on this globalized income, but that social contributions should be also levied on its global income. Because if you do that, indirectly, capital income will be used to compute social contribution. And then you end up merging the two systems, solving the issue I was sketching.
Okay, so the next one is, will we be going rather towards a merging of the capital and worker compensation?
We're back to the previous question.
Okay. Okay, so this one. How to move the conversation from replacing humans with AI to enhancing humans with AI? And how do we train or educate people from doing the work to asking the right question?
That's also a very difficult question, because a year ago some people would say that we would be trained to write prompts on ChatGPT, but today even as writing a prompt is totally unnecessary. Coding is totally unnecessary. So the people who learn to code, that's totally useless. I would say that again, intuitively, I have no answer, but I think that training ourselves in multiple fields, being curious, being open to new ideas, is the only way to overcome the shock of the AI revolution. If we know today that we may be or will be replaced by a machine or supplemented by a machine, the only way to survive this world is to keep on learning. Don't ask me what and when, because it's pure intuition, but I think that the guy, the man or woman, who decides totally to delegate everything to the machine without keeping entertaining his own knowledge is worse off than the guy who do the opposite.
Okay, so the next one, let me find. Okay, so this one. If the shift of wealth between labor and capital is too fast for taxation laws to adapt, people might lose faith in currencies.
Say it again at the end.
Okay, if the shift of wealth between labor and capital is too fast for taxation laws to adapt, people might lose faith in currencies.
I don't think so, because currency do not exist. Money does not exist. It's just a way to measure the price of two independent items using, instead of bettering, money. So money is just an exchange ratio. I don't think that people will lose trust in money, because money will always be there. They may lose faith in the social protection they thought they would deserve.
Okay. Okay, let me find some. Okay, so this one. Do you believe large companies such as GAFA should contribute more to finance the cost of society and pay for a universal income to compensate the loss of job to AI, and therefore the increase of capital?
Somehow I would say yes. But again, universal income is a very difficult concept, because it gives the idea that you get money without doing anything. What I would say is that universal income can be considered if you put together work and self-education, that you would get something like universal income if you keep on training yourself to be, between quotes, useful in the future. But again, that's totally theoretical, what I'm saying here.
Okay, so the next one. Earlier, you mentioned that education will need to change away from knowledge. According to you, what will be tomorrow education like, and what skills would be valued in the future?
You know, I will tell you a story. When I was 14, 12, I don't remember, the first pocket calculator were sold. And there were two debates, because they were quite expensive at the time. Can we ask all students to buy a machine, because all the parents cannot afford to buy a machine? And second question was to know, could it be that people lose the feeling of numbers? And the big deal was to say, if you extract the square root of 9, that is equal to 3, as we know, some people may wrongly input the square root of 90 and think that the square root of 9. So that the reasonableness of figures would disappear. Of course, it did not happen. And so, ultimately, we were forced to extract square root using, you know, the long formulas. Totally stupid. The way I've spent 30 years and still today teaching at university, I think that the model should be that students should teach the class. So instead of thinking that the professor has the knowledge and can share the knowledge to the students, of course, using some guidelines, should be trained to teach themselves and a class what they've learned. And the role of a prof would be to say, have you checked the completeness of the teaching you are giving yourself? Have you tested the depth of what you are saying? So as if the prof would be the one, as a student, would be asking questions to the students. You know what? I'm already using the system at Vlerik, you may know the Vlerik Management School, since 5-7 years ago, and it works quite well. So I teach the 2 first hours, and then all the other hours are being taught by students, which works nicely. And every year I realize that the teaching of students is better than mine. So that would be a way to see that.
Okay, so next one. If premium risks will decrease thanks to IA and will impact the market price, could there be any risk on the global economy? And is there any precaution to be taken in order to prevent a potential crisis?
Have you heard about market efficiency? So market efficiency is a concept being used by economists to qualify financial markets. So if market efficiency means, there are many definitions, but if I put it simply, that the markets know everything. Why? Because we are all in the market. All of us are investors or would be investors. That's why you cannot beat the market, because if you take a look at the market in front of you, actually the market is behind you. So we are all together in a big auction room that's called financial markets. And all our individual knowledge is being summed up, of course, to create this so-called market efficiency. But the market efficiency is also the way to decrease the uncertainty of the future. I think that with AI and with all the scenarios that can be implemented by AI, the multiple scenarios, infinite number of scenarios, the markets will be more efficient than ever. So I would say that it will not lead to a financial crisis. To me, it will lead to an increase of market prices because of the decreasing level of uncertainty thanks to AI. So I'm always asking myself, could it be that the markets are doing well since, I would say, 2 years ago, because the markets are using more and more models to make themselves more efficient thanks to operators. And probably I would trust more a machine that will be able to analyze everything about a company than a financial analyst will be always biased, always. And I wouldn't be surprised, and it must have happened already, that some brokers are pure AI, are not human-driven anymore, probably.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more.
Oh.
So the next one is, given the accelerating integration of AI into every sector, how can governments and industries ensure that economic growth from automation and artificial intelligence benefits all citizens rather than just the owners of capital? And what mechanisms should be put in place to prevent a widening inequality gap?
That's the point I was making. So one day companies will be forced to pay social contributions, but of course the problem is that in Europe we do not have the AI champions. They are located in China or in the US. And that's the absolute failure of our economies, total failure. So we are even today issuing directives or regulation about AI invented by third parties in other continents. And so we are being today dominated by these companies. So asking them to pay social contribution is totally impossible. And so this fuels the riskiness associated with European growth. And if you take a look at the Draghi report that has been issued 2 weeks ago, they're an exact summary, smaller than 400 pages. It's always about education and innovation. But again, will we be able, with multiple countries, being unable to unify ourselves around the same projects to stimulate innovation with economies of scales? On a continental basis, probably no. And that is a big worry. Yes. The last question, the last one. The last one? No, one more.
Okay. All right. So one more. I think this is the last one. So people are created equally. So in that case, how can people with genetic lower IQ be expected to learn perpetually? Will that not be a bigger social gap?
No, of course.
Based on the Darwinism?
People with lower intellectual capacities will be held by the machine. Today, average IQ should be around 100 because it's a normal curve. But I think that somebody who has an IQ of 90 can have an IQ of 160 with a machine. And that's wonderful. It's wonderful because it will help people definitely. Okay?
All right, yeah. So I think that's all the questions that I have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you.